Okay, I dawdled a little bit publishing this show, but we have an international window now of 2 weeks. What else are we going to do until Wolves? Can't wait. And I've always said that if you could take 4 points out of a possible 6 against most opponents, you're having a good season, and that's exactly what Aston Villa did against the Hammers. Let's review. West Ham won, Aston Villa won. Welcome inside the parlor where anticipation is building to a fever pitch for our return to beautiful Birmingham. And our itinerary is absolutely packed, which is really amazing. And this time we'll try not to get travel sick for the first part of the trip, although it didn't even matter last year. We were running on adrenaline and gratitude and wonderment over the whole thing. Now this time Sandra and I will again be outside the McGregor statue, weather permitting, prior to Wolves to mingle a little bit. We'll also do some mingling outside the Holt Steps prior to the Brentford game, and then afterwards I'm going to be at the Aston Social for a bit. Welcome to the Holy Trinity show, which explores the 3 key issues or moments of each Aston Villa game, and there were plenty of those on Sunday. Sumaya Hawa acted as junior correspondent at the London Stadium. Thank you so much. Funny stats for this game. XG heavily favored the hosts. Shot attempts and on target dead on, but passing accuracy the complete opposite. We dominated possession and we were very good on both successful dribbles, but also we had the better ratio of tackles and duels won numbers. First issue, as it usually is, squad selection, which always draws a very vast array of opinions. Some people come right out and say, what a fantastic selection this is, youth, size, potential, oh, this looks so good. And then sometimes those very same people after the game say, oh, that was a terrible selection. Unai Emery got it all wrong again. I actually saw this on the socials. Unai Emery got it wrong again without knowing the rationale behind those decisions. Incredible that unqualified amateur armchair managers can criticize a qualified, well-decorated manager who has us currently in 4th in the Premier League and the Europa Conference League quarterfinals. We don't know how the medical team advises the technical staff on certain players when it comes to load limits. Like, for example, Moussa Diaby had not played 90 minutes for Villa in a long time until the Ajax game on Thursday. How do we know that they didn't tell Unai Emery it might be a bit of a risk to start him in that game? And then with John Duran and Morgan Rogers, I could see a situation against a very physical West Ham team that feasts on dead ball situations and crosses that it might not be a bad idea to have a couple of young, energetic, and physically imposing players to help maybe win some aerial duels now and again. That seems totally logical to me. I could see how the boss would want to reward John Duran's attitude, application, and contributions in the Ajax game with one of his legendary countrymen in attendance watching on, Renny Higuita, Mr. Scorpion Save himself. We saw examples again of how young Morgan Rogers can win a duel, break away, drive, have the confidence to shoot, and we could see him give the ball away at times too. I think the biggest thing for Rogers is that he is still coming to grips and terms with playing at this level. And the only thing that will remedy that is time and experience, and he got just a little bit more of that again on Sunday. Is it also possible that Unai Emery specifically kept back certain players to try to introduce them later to change the game, some fresh legs, given that both teams played on Thursday night, telling the starting group, hey, be competitive, keep it tight, get us to halftime at 0-0. And, looking at the two benches, I think even despite all our injuries, we still probably edged it in terms of quality and impact players that we could introduce. The only thing that really didn't go our way was the fact that we couldn't keep it to 0-0 at halftime. I also read a lot of Ezri Konsa shouldn't be playing at right back because it doesn't work talk. But we have to keep in mind that in Unai Emery's system, with the left back or the farthest left-sided defender playing so high up the park and being given license to play high up the park, that really it is almost a three at the back, which shifts over to the left, making Pau Torres almost kind of like a left back. He's very close to the touchline at times. And then Ezri Konsa shifts in field. And even when Ezri Konsa lines up as a center back, he often drifts out wide as well when the right back or the right forward is high up the park. Remember as well that starting positions have absolutely nothing to do with how you defend one-on-one situations or making simple passes to your teammates. And this brings up my first issue. Konsa didn't really cover himself in glory on the opening goal, and I'm willing to forgive him because it's been a really uneven and odd season for him, given that he's had all these different defensive partners with the injuries we've had, and then of course he had his own injury, so he's never really gotten into the rhythm that he did during the run-in, for example, last year. But similar to the Madison goal, are you marking space or are you marking a player? Because if you're marking a player, you gotta recognize the danger and act on it and get into the right position. And that wasn't the case. I'm not sure Pau Torres meant to drop this deep this quickly, because even in these types of situations, we've seen Villa hold a very laser-tight defensive line trying to catch players offside. And because he drops deep, well, he does give the attacking players license to go. And regardless of that, Ezri Konsa is either letting Antonio go because he thinks he will be offside. Maybe he didn't see Pau Torres in that split second. Or he's just kind of caught napping a little bit because he is on the wrong side of arguably their biggest danger man. Or he's completely late to react. And that has nothing to do with where he's shown in the starting lineup. In fact, in this case, he's in the location of a traditional center back. And I'm not trying to pick on Ezri Konsa, but just prior to that goal, we did have a free kick in a defensive position, and Ezri Konsa presided over it and looked extremely indecisive as to where to play the ball. And I'm not always a big fan of playing that ball backwards to your own goal line and inviting the hard press, which is exactly what happened. From there, possession changed. We had to kick the ball out, and from that change of possession, West Ham scored. Now, you can't blame Ezri Konsa entirely for the pass. You also have to ask his teammates, well, where were you as simple and available options? Obvious issue, we missed McGinn. Yes, Youri Tielemans is very familiar with that position, and yes, Youri Tielemans had a major hand in our equalizing goal. But one of the big issues from the first half especially was our inability at times to navigate from back through midfield and then up front, which is our shtick. You know, we possess the ball deep, we find the gaps and then play through that first wave and then accelerate on to try to create goal-scoring opportunities. And at times in that first half, West Ham committed men forward. I counted 6 once, but they were very passive. They weren't pressing us hard. And we found it difficult at times to get through that and connect with midfielders and then on to forwards. Luiz always seems to know when and where to be to make himself available. And then when you have John McGinn, in addition to that, you have a second option of a guy who finds the good spaces and receives the ball on the half turn so he could survey the entire field. Oftentimes he sprints away with the ball. Sometimes he wriggles away from a challenge, and other times he just uses his sturdy frame to invite a challenge and earn a foul when he's not just playing the ball backwards. Now, Youri Tielemans had a very tidy day statistically, especially in passing accuracy. 93%. That is, wow, good. But what you lose a little bit with an elegant player like him is a little bit of speed and a little bit of physicality. And I think the opponents know that, and I think they pick on him because he lost almost half of his ground duels, of which there were 13. Big honorable mention moment. This could have easily been a top 3 moment, but credit Cash again. And I know you're probably thinking that I'm now a Matt Cash apologist, but this is 2 games in a row where he's made a very important defensive intervention against Ajax. He read the danger and he was quick to react, which takes experience and a little bit of game IQ. In this game, he prevented arguably what would have been the game-winning goal. When I saw this develop, my heart sunk because the ball popped straight into James Ward-Prowse's wheelhouse. I mean, penalty spot area where he rarely misses. And Cash just throws himself on the line, makes an awesome block, rightfully gives himself a fist bump because, that was the difference between earning at least a point or none at that stage of the game. And that is not the only time that Matt Cash has made a very critical intervention defensively during the course of the season. But you know what? I thought, like the other substitutes, Cash also made some meaningful contributions and was really lively in the opposite end of the park. He went on several runs, driving the byline, trying to hook it back, winning a corner on one. He almost fooled Areola at the near post. What he won't be happy with upon reviewing that game was his passing percentage, which was only 68%. That and his ability to be ruthless and deadly accurate with his crosses and crossing selection for that matter. Those are the 2 things for me that I know he himself will want to work on. Annoying, never-ending issue. What is a handball? So ironic that in this game where 2 goals were chalked off because the ball glanced off an attacker's arm, we also had this happen. So I get and agree that goals should not be scored with arms or hands. This, I think, was the Thierry Henry clause introduced about 11 or so years ago. But it's just bizarre that we're saying within the laws, you cannot have a ball even glance off a hand or arm and go in and count, but we still don't know what this is. I believe Leon Bailey saw the arm extended and cleverly plays the ball off of it. He's good enough to do that. But we and the referee can't read Leon Bailey's mind. Why was the defender's arm extended in that manner in the box? Defenders will say, well, that's a natural position because he's gesturing to his teammate to cover Ezri Konsa, who had made a penetrating run. Again, though, referee can't read minds. How do we know that Bailey wasn't trying to play Konsa on the run that he made and the defender's arm blocked that from happening? What's crazy to me is that if Jared Gillett had awarded a penalty for this incident, VAR would not have overturned it for a clear and obvious error. And yet, VAR also reviewed the incident, and they did not instruct Jared Gillett to go to the monitor and review it for himself because they did not deem it to be a clear and obvious error that he did not award the penalty. Therefore, what we have here is a subjective law. And as I've said on this program before, in fact, I did an entire episode on this subject, subjective law does not work. Ever. Subjective decisions put unnecessary and undue pressure on referees and the VAR teams. Not to mention it's confusing for players, for fans, when week to week we don't know what a handball is, or for defenders to not know what a natural or unnatural position is. And what's also frustrating is that 99% of the time, if that same circumstance occurred outside the area, handball is given because it's not as punitive as when it happens in the area. And this is ultimately why the law has to be dramatically rewritten so that it is applied evenly, no matter what the situation is. Paul Handsaker was at the London Stadium for this one, and I asked Paul before, would you take on projects in London? And 24/7 Services has taken on projects that far south before, but for now, they're still going to focus themselves on Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. And the scope of work is wide. Like, industrial scale roofing is their bread and butter, but they do literally everything. Like, for example, gas and plumbing work, which is Mitchell and Owen's bailiwick. And I sure hope these guys wear name tags when they're out and about because, man, Twins flummox me. They mess with my brain, honestly. So if you have a project, hopefully not an emergency, but they could deal with those, or otherwise, start with the 24/7 Services website. Big issue number 3, crossing conundrum. We are having a mini crisis at the moment in terms of defending crosses, whether that's from open play or from dead ball situations. We got done by Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur, now this one, and if it weren't for video intervention, we would have conceded 2 more from crosses. Is one of the problems that we are playing too narrow? And this goal on Sunday was a perfect example. I mean, are we giving Soufal that amount of time and space to tee it up and whip it in? Is Morgan Rogers just a little bit delayed? Does he try hard enough to close this down? Or has he been asked to remain a little bit more on the central side? The other issue, and I've brought it up on this show before, but despite how spectacular he's been for club and country, I wouldn't put Emi Martinez in the adventurous class in terms of coming out for crosses. I'm not saying he's in the vampire category of avoid crosses at all cost, but you do wonder if teams are exploiting the fact that he does like to remain on his line. And then from dead ball situations, they're putting an attacking player right on him, because if you prevent those first 2 critical strides, you could probably prevent him from getting 2 across. And West Ham was dropping balls right on top of him all game long from dead ball situations. However, Emi Martinez is not responsible for his defenders correctly marking the players that are bearing down on him. And I've given you 3 examples where we are not defending correctly. We are defending space, not human beings. We are on the wrong side of those players. Is that because we're letting them go in order to try to catch them offside? Because if so, it's too late when a good cross is played in. The good news is this is an obvious trend that is leading to goals, and there is no chance our technical team is going to ignore trends that are leading to goals. Big moment number 2, substitute synergy. I'd like to start by making a bold prediction that Moussa Diaby is going to go back to starting every single one of our final 9 league games on this run-in the position he started the season at, as a number 10. He has looked every bit our record signing in these last 2 games, called up by France. Has there been some kind of renewal of confidence? Because for me, Aston Villa's biggest attacking threat is with Ollie Watkins up front and Ramsey, Diaby, and Bailey playing in behind him. And wouldn't you know it, Diaby inspires the equalizer. This all starts with quick distribution from Emi Martinez, which gets lost before the Yuri Tielemans ball, which was perfect. And Diaby anticipates that ball is going to be dropped beyond the defender. And then he does what he did a couple of times in the game. In fact, Matt Cash did it as well. Drive the byline into that area I talk about all the time, where defenders and goalkeepers are incapable of looking at 2 things at the same time, the ball and the space in the box. Diaby with the perfect cutback, more impressive by the fact that his body is not really shaped up to cut it back the way he does, and that he uses his less preferred right foot. Then the other substitute, Nicolo Zaniolo, provides the critical touch. The big Italian can best be described as an enigma, because everything about this goal was top class, starting with the timing of the run. If he goes too early, the ball's behind him. If he goes late, the defender gets it. And then, in that critical moment, he has to apply the proper technique for the situation, which in this case was a toe poke, and he had only a split second to make that determination. And that toe poke had to slither along the ground to go under and through legs and into the back of the net. What I found so intriguing about this goal was how diverse the celebrations were from the 2 protagonists. I mean, Moussa Diaby was well chuffed, and you could see he knew how critical his contribution was to it, and the importance not only in the context of the game at that point, but perhaps potentially in the context of the season. And then Zaniolo is the ultimate in low hype celebration, as if he's done it 1,000 times before. And that is what is so confounding about this player. He obviously has technical ability, sense, IQ, all of those things, including confidence. And yet he has been unable to apply those skills for long, consistent runs in the season. And yet I somehow feel that this goal and Zaniolo will somehow still have a meaningful role to play in the run-in. And the number one issue or moment that defined West Ham United 1, Aston Villa 1, VAR vanquishes victory. And I realize that we often complain about how VAR is applied and how long it takes and how it interferes, but there is no question. Without those two reviews, we would have come away from London Stadium with nothing. Two reviews that earned us a half point each and kept our unbeaten run in London alive to 10 games. Do you know the last time we lost in the capital was that fateful night in Fulham when Stevie G was dumped? As I said earlier, this aspect of the handball law is black and white. You cannot have the ball go off a hand or arm into the goal. There's no discussion and no debate, and it was obvious in both of the reviews. David Moyes was having a go at the officials afterwards. I don't know what for, and you know what? Even if they didn't call handball on Souček, he pulled Konza back just prior to that. So, they go through the protocols. First offside, is there a hand involved in the goal? And then after that, is there a critical foul that leads to the ball crossing the goal line? And in all three cases, it's right there for everybody to see. The first one, another ball that seemed to completely confound Emi Martinez, with Mikhail Antonio closely monitoring our goalkeeper, thankfully glances off the Jamaican's arm. And that's a good thing, because that early in the second half to go down 2-0, that's it. It's done. It's finished right there. And on the second one, this is one of those unfortunate times where you can't complain about the length of time it takes to come to a decision, hopefully with the right camera angle, because either you want the correct decision or you don't. And the only thing I found kind of odd about it was that Jared Gillett was sent to the monitor to look at it himself, because it looked like, from all the replays I saw, that it was pretty cut and dry overall. It even looked like it went off Jared Bowen's arm before it finally crossed the goal line. And so there is nothing to discuss here. It was clear as day. And the irony is, while that was black and white, this is the complete opposite. Just to review the categories that I like to look back on, those two VAR decisions could be huge when we look back on the season in late May. A point on the road is never a bad thing. Once again, we didn't score first, but it is another point that we gained against a London side after falling behind. Add West Ham to Spurs, Palace, and Brentford just this year. The rest of the categories pretty much stayed the same. Next up, Wolves. Oh boy, our bogey team, the Dingles, have our number for some reason, especially at Villa Park. And yes, we won't have John McGinn for that one, but we should have Jacob Ramsey back in time for that. And a couple of weeks of rest for everybody who's not taking part in internationals, including Leon Bailey, which is a good thing that he wasn't called up by Jamaica, because CONCACAF travel and conditions can be challenging and taxing. So let's hope all of our players who are involved in international competition do have some meaningful involvement for their pride and their confidence, but not so much that it's strenuous and absolutely touching wood that nobody comes back dinged up. As for Wolves, they are coming off an absolutely devastating loss at home in the FA Cup quarter-final to Coventry City, who scored twice in stoppage time to win that game. It was very much like the game they won at Villa Park after trailing 2-1. They got wolved. And that's the funny nature about this team. Sometimes they look like top six material. Other times they look a little bit fragile. And I'm glad there's 2 weeks between that game and ours, because they would have loved to have had a bounce back opportunity right away, especially in a derby at a local rival where they've had some success of late. And as much as certain pundits are lauding the job that Gary O'Neill has done at Molineux, I don't like him. There's a pettiness to this guy somehow, as evidenced by some of his comments post the Coventry City loss. And you remember how he behaved during our meeting earlier this year at Molineux, where he gave the El Costardo to Unai Emery, or said something that prompted our manager to march straight down the tunnel and into the dressing room. And then afterwards, O'Neill blew it off like it didn't even matter. So believe me, I am gagging for my 100% in-person winning percentage to continue at home in a couple of Saturdays' time. And it's also extremely important for us to keep our noses in front of our chasers. I am now officially busting in anticipation for the trip. And travel is a miracle I will never take for granted. The idea that you can walk onto what will eventually be a pressurized tube that hurtles through the atmosphere at 500 kilometers per hour, 10 hours later arriving in a foreign land and back in Brum. It's just preposterous, frankly. But the fact that we now know the city and can get our way around a bit more, and that we know so many people who we call friends, is going to bring a totally different dynamic to this trip, not to mention my first ever Villa away game at Manchester City. Until the Wolves game, be well, and as always, up the mighty Villa!